As you watch the screen, your heart begins to beat faster. There's a fluttering in the pit of your stomach. Your throat is dry. Your palms damp. Suddenly a chill runs down your spine. You clutch the person next to you. You tell yourself, it's only a movie. It's only a movie. But sooner or later, it's time to go home.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Anthony from Tis the Podcast.
And this is our review of Smile, starring Sosie Bacon, Jesse T. Usher, Kyle Gallner, Caitlin Stacey, Kyle Penn, Rob Morgan, Robin Weigart, Jillian Zinser, and Jack Soche. Written and directed by Parker Finn, released in 2022 on a $17 million budget, already grossed over $90 million at the box office as of this recording. This may be the most impromptu Film Strip episode of all time, going all the way back to the original days when Anna and I were doing rom-coms, and we were scheduled to do one. We both watched the movie, realized we had nothing to say about it, but both had recently watched While You Were Sleeping, and it's kind of audible at the last minute to do that. We both knew it enough. But since then, you were usually playing these things out. We were just planning for 3 chapters this October, but I saw this in a matinee. It's been out for a couple weeks now, but I finally got around to it, Anthony. And I walked out of it and I was like, man, I really wish I had a Film Strip episode about this. Who in the world has possibly seen this that could talk about it on a moment's notice? And you were the first person I thought of. So I'm thankful that you're here.
I am honored to be here. And I'm honored to be making that Film Strip history since the beginning, the most impromptu episode.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Anthony, do introduce yourself to folks. Tell folks a little bit about Tis the Podcast.
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure most of your listeners probably heard me by now. I've been on a few times, but I host a year-round Christmas movie podcast with my co-hosts, Tom and Julia. Every Monday, we drop a new episode in which we discuss a different Christmas movie, TV show, television special, and rank and review them. It's currently October, so we are taking a break to cover some Halloween content, which is always fun because 5 years into the show, we've really exhausted all the good Christmas content, but we still have plenty of good Halloween content since we're only hitting that stuff once a year. Yeah. But you can find us wherever you download podcasts. Just search Tis the Podcast.
Absolutely. And follow them on Twitter. It'll be linked in the podcast description. You know our friends at Tis the Podcast. Always good to come on. And like I say, Anthony, I came out of this one and had thoughts and thought, well, you know what? I need to talk about this with someone. So I'm glad you were here to do that. But I got to tell you, like, I had no idea this movie was even a thing. I only know Sosie Bacon really from like the one season of 13 Reasons Why I bothered to watch and realized that show's not really for me and I don't want it to be, and kind of moved on from that. And I mean, she was great in it, and I had no idea who she was, that she was, Kira Sedgwick and Kevin Bacon's kid. But when you see her, it's like, oh yeah, now I get it, right. But I don't really know her other work or anything.
So you didn't see any of the viral marketing for this?
Well, that's the thing. I saw an ad, like I think it was just on television one day, and it's the clip where she walks by and the guy's just sitting on the bed, just creepy smiling, and she's snapping at him, and then it's a big jump, and I'm like, well, okay, now we've just come to that, and I immediately in my head thought, hey, that's like that short that was on YouTube that once where the chick kept flipping the lights on and out, and that shadow kept appearing.
Oh yeah,
and I thought about that, and I was like, well, okay, I kind of liked the lights out. I thought, that's kind of an underappreciated little movie that came out, and it actually had something to say. It was kind of a trauma movie, and I thought, okay, this is neat. But I had really paid no other attention to it. The work has been nuts for me the last 5 or 6 weeks, so I really have been kind of behind on a lot of movie trailers and whatnot, which in some ways is working out well because it's Shocktober, and we're going to do Halloween Ends, and I know almost nothing about that movie, which is going to be a really cool experience. But I didn't know much about this. I just kept seeing like a little bit of trailers and stuff, and then I heard a little bit of Scuttle coming out of like Fantastic Fest about it, and sort of that, hey, it's about a lot more than just, it's not just, jump scares and stuff. And I thought, okay, I'm curious. I want to see that. And then, like I say, it was just a matter of finding the time to go do it. And so I finally just said, okay, honestly, the morning slate of NFL games was really lousy. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to the matinee. We're going to knock this thing out. And I'm glad I didn't know a lot, though. I mean, I went in kind of cold and just sat there and absorbed it for the 2 hours I was in the theater.
Yeah, I saw the trailers for this, and I mean, I don't know. You said you've avoided them full-length trailers, right? Like, they didn't give away a lot. They gave away one of the best jump scares in the movie, where the lady's head comes down her sister's head, like, falls by the window, which is a shame. But it still didn't really give much of the plot away, except it's full of creepy, smiling people. So I'm like, this looks interesting. And I saw it one Friday afternoon by myself, went to the early afternoon matinee, and I loved it. I thought it had some good things to say about grief and trauma, and I think this is honestly could be the spiritual sequel or sibling of It Follows.
Oh, this movie owes a lot of its legacy to Ringu and The Ring, and then It Follows, certainly. I think also kind of like Sinister, and then as I've already mentioned, the lesser appreciated Lights Out, and maybe even the even more lesser appreciated Jessica Chastain joint, Mama, which is from several years ago. My wife happens to be a big fan of and turned me on to, and I thought, you know what? Okay, I'm willing to go with this because I just want to be, taken away and entertained. It takes a lot to actually scare me. Jump scares always get me, obviously, because it's just a visceral reaction. But there were times in the theater where the hair was standing up on my arms and my neck, and I thought, well, it's been a while since I felt like that creepy. And it's daytime, and there's like maybe 10 people in this theater. I am totally safe. What am I freaking out about? and I was like, well, this is just unnerving. And but I like that a lot, and we'll get into it as we get into it. There's certain things about this and the way it was shot and some of the music cues and stuff that I think this movie is borrowing from a lot of things that have happened. And sometimes that can be a problem for a movie, or sometimes it can really work. Like the original Scream owes a whole lot to a lot of other movies, particularly the original John Carpenter Halloween movie, as we've talked about, and on both of our shows at different times. But I mean, really, and I'm like, that's not a bad thing to owe your legacy to something else if you can do something with it that maybe is a little different, or at least just represent it in a way. And I was impressed by this. I don't know Parker Finn from anything. I understand like this much like Lights Out was a short, and like Saw before it was a short, and the producers Paramount got behind it and said, hey, we'll give you some money for that. And for $17 million, what he gets out of this is pretty impressive. Yeah, I mean, I don't know Charlie Saroff either, the cinematographer, but I made a note to write his name down because I thought some of the shots in this, I'm like, this is a way too classy shot to be in this kind of B movie like this. I mean, this is good looking stuff in this. And I don't know, I was really impressed with the way that they were able to put it together. But yeah, I didn't know much about it going in other than just who was in it, and kind of, I'd seen some of the, the one trailer, and like I said, I kind of seen the viral pieces. I saw like at Major League Baseball games, they started sticking like, I think it was
smiling people. Yeah.
The actors and I was like, did they get the actors to go to this? Did they Blair Witch this stuff? And I'm like, man, Paramount's putting some dough out for this. And
I love a good marketing campaign like that.
Right? Well, so that's never part of the budget, right? But it's usually at least what the budget is. I'm like, Paramount has spent some money on this, but it's worked because it made almost $100 million off of it. Anytime you can get that kind of return on something, particularly when you can get out early in the Halloween season, because Halloween Ends is going to be massive. You got Black Adam coming out, which will be this big DC movie. There's other things that are coming out in theaters that are going to dominate it here in a little bit. And the fact that they got out early in front of all of that might be the surprise of the scary season. I'm curious to see if Laurie Strode can hold like this, especially since that's a simul release. I know the last one wasn't made money, but we'll see. But for this one, I didn't know anything about it. Do you know anything about the director or the background here?
Nothing. But to piggyback off something you said earlier, you sat in the theater broad daylight with 10 other people and were getting spooked. The same thing happened to me. And the best way I can compare it to is the other night, I saw Terrifier 2 in a, it was 7:30 at night, completely dark. Theater was packed. And that whole time, I had fun with that movie, but it was fun. I was laughing the whole time. This movie did a really good job of creating this eerie atmosphere that permeated the entire thing. And I feel like not enough horror movies do that nowadays, or can't at least make me feel that way. So kudos to them.
Yeah, and we'll get into this one too, because I didn't even know what this was rated when I went and saw it, and I realized very quickly I was like, oh, this is definitely a rated R movie because of the amount of gore going and the number of F-bombs that we were throwing around as if they were just candy. And I was like, oh, well, we just clearly jumped right through that, and that's another bold choice though, because studios with horror movies have trended for about 20 years now to try to water them down, and let's just skirt on that. Let's be PG-13. Really, what you get is kind of a compromised vision. I'm not saying you have to be just grotesque or Rob Zombie or something in the movie as far as language goes, but I want a good horror movie. I want a good scare. I want it to live up to the blood, and this one certainly does. It's got some visceral gore in it, in addition to some of the other stuff that's going on, and a lot of the themes that it's about.
Yep, for sure. Agreed.
Well, okay, spoilers hot, everybody, and just in case it's not already obvious, but we're about to blow this movie for you. So if you have any intention of seeing it at all, thanks for downloading Pause. Go watch it, and then come back and listen to me and Anthony chop up about it for a little while here. But you've been warned. So I'm about to tell you everything this movie's about. I'm trying to just cut as much of a straight line through this as I can, Anthony. We'll have to talk about how it unravels itself. But
yep, and I do want to say before we hop in, this is one movie I would recommend, even if you don't mind spoilers, go in as blind as possible.
I agree.
Heed our advice and pause now, go watch the movie and come back.
Yeah, definitely. I'll spoil that part for the end here, but yeah, you should go see this. And if you want to know at all, if you want to be cold on it at all, then this is definitely the way to watch this kind of movie. So in this film, psychiatrist Dr. Rose Cotter is driven to help patients by a strong desire to overcome a tremendous sense of guilt she feels having watched her mother's suicide at age 10. Thoroughly devoted to her work, Rose has a cold relationship with her fiance, Trevor, and an antagonist one with her older sister, Holly, which strains her relationships with Holly's husband and son. When a PhD student is referred to Rose because of hallucinations she's having of an evil presence that greets her with a wide, creepy smile, Rose tries to intervene only for the young woman to break a flower pot and cut her own throat and face off in front of her. Traumatized by this, Rose begins to fall apart in spite of trying to power through it all, and is in the process discovers a series of suicides by people who see others kill themselves and then enlist the help of a police detective named Joel, whom she once had a relationship with. Rose becomes convinced that there's a way to break this pattern and learns of a prisoner who did so by killing someone else, thus passing on the curse. But refusing that path and further unraveling, Rose travels back to her childhood home, which is now run down, and confronts the memory of her mother's death. See, Rose didn't just find her mother, but she refused to help her mother's final pleas after she overdosed on pills, deeming her to be too much of a monster to keep living, or at least that's the memory Rose has of it. The evil force behind it all finally reveals itself as a 9-foot monstrosity, kind of like the Paranormal Activity, the Ghost Dimension for some reason. Then Rose realizes it's just a product of her tortured psyche as she sets it on fire and escapes. Except she doesn't escape. The entity reveals its true final form and inhabits Rose just as Joel arrives. Rose dons that creepy smile, pours kerosene on herself, and strikes a match as Joel watches her burn, leaving us to believe he is now next in line for the smile curse. And there's a lot of misdirections in this. There's a lot to do, but that's pretty much what happens in this movie. So we'll have to get into it as we go. But from the get-go, the thing that I will credit this movie for is, and I don't know this composer at all, and I'm going to butcher his poor name, Cristobal Tapia Denver. If I've messed up your name, my apologies to your family, sir, as you're from Chile. But his work here is very Carpenter-esque. And I mean like a very specific realm of Carpenter-esque. I'm talking about Thing, Escape from New York, Halloween 3, Carpenter mood and synth and pings and just noises and stuff. And man, I mean, from the opening bell, it just takes me into a different place. I already know, like, there's this gray kind of hue over the whole movie. It's at least placed in New Jersey. I don't know if it was shot there or not, but they certainly nailed like the Northeast fall gray time of year. You're from there, Anthony. You tell me, did they get that right? Because it sure felt like it.
They nailed it. And let me tell you, this, what did you say his name was? A musician?
Cristobal Tapia Denver.
Yeah, let me tell you, he underscored, just like John Carpenter does in all of his films, how important a score is to a horror movie to make it effective. His score was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's it's the mood setter, right? You know, I mean, that's the common thing people have said about movies before they hit the score on them is like, this is boring. And I'm like, well, yeah, this movie would be incredibly weird and kind of boring without the music in it. Because the dialogue comes in like these quick dumps. And I got to give Sosie Bacon a credit here. And I think part of this is just, I'm always remembering that Sky character she played in 13 Reasons Why. But she plays like this good, nervous kind of on the edge energy, kind of breaking apart, and she has these eyes, and I can only say she gets them from her mother, because Kirsten Sedgwick always looks like she's on the verge of tears, and whether that's real or not, that's just how she looks. And her daughter has the same look, and she always kind of looks like she's on the verge of just being completely stressed out and worn out. And I'm not a psychiatrist, but I've had counseling training, and I know people that work in that field, and it can be an incredibly taxing job. And so I know people that go through this, and even some of the counselors I work with now, I can see how people get caught up in this stuff. So when we meet this woman, she's already kind of on the ragged edge. She's just sort of worn out. And I love how they just throw us in. We know nothing about her. We're not going to get a whole lot about her except through little pieces. But the way she plays it and how she plays somebody who's clearly exhausted, but is driven by something to help and make a difference for people, it's compelling. It draws us right in, or at least it did for me.
It did for me as well. And like you, I know people in that field, and I thought it was incredibly real to life. I mean, you talk to people in that field in real life, and that's why they say, like, shows like House with the dark humor, like they say you run into that a lot in real life because you need it to survive in those fields because of what you deal with day to day. But yeah, I bought her from the moment she was introduced on the screen. And I think even if audiences aren't personally familiar with people in that field, they can at least relate to that feeling of being overworked. Like, she looks exhausted, like she's going to collapse at any moment.
Yeah, I mean, just like she's got too many cups of coffee, and just it won't matter. Like, she could drink 10 Ventis and it wouldn't make a difference. All the espresso would not matter. But they bring in this young woman to her PhD student, and the way they describe it and the way she reacts to it is exactly how I would. Like, she watched her professor kill himself with a hammer in front of her. And I'm I sort of went in my head to a real weird place. I went to that place where that just rando guy in Halloween is telling Donald Pleasance about that guy that got a hacksaw. I just was like, just this most random story of like, how would you even do that? I mean, I guess I know, but yikes, yeah, that would be weird. And so you can see why that fishes her in. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing about this. And, this movie is about a lot of things. I think we'll talk about, some of the allegory as we get into it. But if it just is a straight line, it's just about a curse, and it's random. And that's what's awesome about it, is that it's not related to her. She doesn't know any of these people. None of these people know each other except just through their contacts with each other.
It's just pure bad luck that she ran into this woman. Yep.
It's almost like that Denzel Washington movie, Fallen. Where it's just that Spirit is just kind of bouncing around in there. Now he's a little more tied to that story centrally, but same basic idea. And I kind of like that here. And again, if this movie is, if anything, it's an homage to a lot of different stuff. And I kept going back to like The Ring as well. Like, it's just, it just happened on Naomi Watts' desk, and that's a good story. And here we go. Curiosity and all that stuff. And it's that same kind of feeling though, that I got watching The Ring all those years ago, that I'm getting watching this opening scene where this young woman, and I don't know who Caitlin Stasey is, but we talk about just nailing it, going from, again, completely like zoned out and just frayed edge person to being attacked, to then that smile. And as she cuts her face off, basically, I was just like, what? And 5 minutes into this movie, I was dropped.
It is amazing because you would never think a smile could be so creepy, but man, it was effective.
Oh, I would. I grew up around clowns. What are you talking about?
Clowns?
Yeah,
I pretend clowns don't exist, Jay. Because they scare me so
anything
much.
that's oppressively happy is that's a problem. And
what world are you living in, people?
I mean, really, like that's the thing, though. That's what makes it unnerving. It's like, why are you looking at me like? And I love how and she really only gets the one scene. She's in a couple of like pop-ups here, but the way she describes this, it's like it's this thing. I can't really tell you what it is, but you're not gonna believe me. And she, and I love how Sosie Bacon as Dr. Rose here is really she's trying to calm her down, but she's not. She's doing good counselor like play. I was really impressed with her and the other lady that plays the therapist in this, like the way that they go about questioning and it's just sort of, okay, we're just gonna work the problem, but they're not trying to solve you. They're not trying to get you to calm down, unquote. They're just going like, okay, so tell me what that's like. Okay, well, why do you feel that way? Well, and they're just the good questions coming out. And I was like, whoever wrote this has either been to therapy or knows some therapists, has read a couple good books, like knows how to do that, because that is not something that is natural. You have to learn how to do that. And I was really impressed with the way that unfurled.
They did their research, and I'll say that's a pet peeve of mine with a lot of films, whether you're doing a cop, procedural, doctor, whatever. The people who clearly didn't research what it's actually like to be in that field, huge pet peeve of mine in film. So I was really impressed with this, with the writing of the counseling scenes.
Oh no, definitely so. And again, just the way this opens up, and it's going to be one of many times that they do this, where a character turns their back to the audience, and don't turn around, but they've got to turn around. And and when they do, we do. And it's like, no, please don't do this. And I actually caught myself going like, do I want to look at that? A couple times I was like, okay, now this movie has won something already, because that normally I would be like, yeah, just come on, bring it. And I was like, okay, I'm genuinely creeped out the first 5 minutes into this movie. And I think I knew like, okay, something bad obviously has got to happen here. And it's also when, we see Rose try to pick up and go from that, right? She has to talk to her. And I didn't know Kal Penn was in this too, but he just kind of pops up as this doctor administrator guy. And I'm like, well, okay, good for you. Good to see you still getting work. And he's telling her like, hey, you got to tell me this, that, and the other, some procedural thing or whatever. And I love how she's just trying to work with this vulnerable guy, poor Carl. And I don't know who this dude is, but Jack Soche, hats off to you, sir. That was an incredible portrayal. I haven't seen something that good since like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
You couldn't help in one moment feeling completely heartbroken for him, and then the next being completely terrified of him. He did it so well. One of the best ancillary characters in this film, for sure.
Yeah, and he's in like 3 scenes, but the way that he comes in and he's just sort of repeating those words, I'm going to die, she's going to die, we're all going to die. And he's just sort of mumbling all that.
Life is meaningless, yep.
Yeah, I know.
Nothing really matters.
Like, wow, I know. I'm like, man, this is like, we've gone off the, too much 9 Inch Nails for you. And she's trying to get him to, of course, process. And she's like, hey, he's probably harmless. Let's just keep him for observation, doing the smart doctor thing, right? But she sees that he hasn't really been there, that he's not really there, right? And that's when she comes back to see him again. And this was the part I think I saw in the teaser, was when he's just sitting there grinning at her and she's like snapping at him. And then he just goes into a different place for her, which I think I interpret now as the curse thing. That's how it gets to you, is you've now seen somebody die, so that's going to torture you and drive you mad for 4 days. So then you'll do this horrific thing, and that's how it passes itself. That's at least how I understood it. And this is just manifesting itself through him,
Which to your point is like The Ring, this whole 7 days thing before she passes it on. And like I said earlier, it follows. Like you pass it on to unsuspecting people through having sex. It's essentially a sexual STD. And all of a sudden you start getting stalked by this monster until you either succumb to it or pass it on. So.
Right. And this is where the Lights Out thing came in too, because when they start talking about suicide, and spoiler alert, Lights Out is also about dealing with trauma from people taking their own life and being related to them, and sort of the mental anguish of that. This movie borrows a lot from that too. And I thought, that's kind of neat that we can take a very deep, dark, heavy subject like that and do something like this with it, where if you want to read all the allegory into it, you can, or if you just want to watch a scary ass ghost movie with that as kind of the backdrop for it, it works either way. And that's hard to do, because, movies like this can either come off like too preachy, which sometimes Lights Out kind of leaned over into, not the short, but the full length one.
Yep.
Or they do like this one where they almost like run away from it when they probably shouldn't. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But yeah, I was blown away by how they introduced that concept here and how she starts to learn about all this stuff.
Well, before we move on from, his character, this guy, how it manifests through him when she's in front of him snapping. Talk about like So horror movies often, at least modern horror movies, don't make you feel for the main character.
Mm-hmm.
You felt for this woman the entire time, Dr. Rosie Cutter. You felt for her the whole time. But the way this curse plays with her, this patient was actually doing nothing, and she calls in like the men in white coats to tackle him and basically sedate him and traumatizes him even more for doing nothing. And like seeing his reaction in the aftermath of that and her reaction like, oh crap, what have I done? Like that was heartbreaking.
That's when you realize that the way this curse works is, and the way it drives you mad, is that it gets you to do things to people that you normally would do no harm to. And then that guilt just weighs on you even more, because we didn't talk about it. She goes home that night from the Laura character having killed herself, and she's just, you know, she's like anybody. She's trying to process that. She's sitting there, and fiance comes to the door and she drops a glass. You know, she does it 2 or 3 times in this movie. And because she's seeing that girl sitting over in the corner, she's seeing her everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, you would hallucinate for that. I could see that. That's, you know, PTSD. That's part of it.
Those shots of the girl in the dark, though, so effective.
Again,
really creepy.
Yeah, again, Charlie Saroff, the cinematographer here, I'm like, man, you clearly come from the school of Dean Cundy and know how to like subtly just stick stuff in the background and freak everybody out, because that was well done.
Yep.
But I like how Rose responds to this though too. She's like, you know what? I'm going back to my therapist. You know, and I'm like, you know what? I mean, most of the time, like, people in horror movies make the dumbest decision possible to move the plot forward. But this movie works in the reverse of that, Anthony. You have to make the smart choice to actually move the plot forward, which obviously will ultimately kill you, which is weird. I mean, so it's counterintuitive, but it's also kind of neat to watch, right? That, oh, you're actually doing the right thing, and it's going to cost you everything.
And of course, her doctor doesn't necessarily think it's the right thing because she hasn't been in a while. And the first thing she does is ask for a certain type of drug. And her doctor's like, let's wait a few sessions. Before
Can I tell you how much I love that, by the way, though? Because again, movie doctors are like, sure, here's prescriptions. I'm like, nope, they don't just hand those out for nothing, kids. Like, you actually have to prove it. So, her life's on the line for that too. She's like, I'm not going to court for you. So, and by the way, I saw her office, so I'm like, no, she's clearly several
she knows what she's doing
for her therapy. So, but I don't know Robin Weigart from anything. I know her face. I don't know that I've seen a ton of the stuff she's in, but immediately I knew who she was. I was like, oh yeah, I know you. And I'm like, at some point you're going to become somewhat evil in this somehow. And she doesn't really, but she kind of does. She has one scene that's pretty amazing later, but as a character, the actual character is very attentive, very good. And so again, another nod to good therapy and good stuff being shown about therapy there. And I like how Rose is trying to take care of herself while also trying to keep up with all of her responsibilities and all these things. And we got to talk about the dinner she goes to with her sister. I mean, I thought all of a sudden I thought, did the disc skip and we get Sex in the City 3 or something? Because I thought I was in a different movie when Jillian Zinser shows up, and the way she's just nonstop, and her poor put upon husband is just over there. He's just whipped in the corner. And
they were completely from a different film, those two. But I loved this scene because the whole time I'm sitting there like, really? And then finally, Rose snaps with, you shut the fuck up. I'm like, yes, thank you.
They're just going at each other the whole time. I mean, she's just constantly nagging her, and the sister is, and she just unloads, and I'm like, oh. But that's when you see that, you're like, oh, she's got an edge that she is desperately trying to hide. And for an actor to be able to do that, that's hard to pull off and it not be so obvious, right? That they're hiding it. And Sosie Bacon does such a good job of, again, being on that kind of frayed corner of everything and then just exploding at the wrong moment. And she realizes it. And I love it. I love the Greg, the husband, like they bring you steak. He's like, well, I've been looking forward to this all week. And he's like, thank God I can just eat this and go home.
Yeah. And we've all been at awkward dinners like that. Just like we've all related to Rose in this moment, right? We've all been overworked or overtired to the point where somebody just happens to run into you on the wrong day or say the wrong thing, even if they didn't mean it, and you just snap.
Oh yeah, look, I'm there, and I'm fortunate at this point in my life that I know enough about myself that I will straight up cancel plans on you if I know I'm in that place. I'm like, I'm not going to be good company tonight. I know I'm not. I'm just gonna I'll even tell my wife, I'm like, I'm just gonna go over here because I promise I'm not good company right now. Just trust me, and that and it works. So. Learn that about yourself. Learn those boundaries, kids. It makes a difference. But because Rose does not, and that's part of the problem. And we know why, though, and it's what we'll start to figure out why. Because what they're arguing about is the husband is kind of saying, like, you guys should just sell that land, or, where your old mom's old dilapidated house is. I don't know why y'all are hanging on to it. What are you hanging on to it for? You're not going to live there, and all this stuff. And she obviously can't let go of that. And we'll learn why later.
Yep.
Yeah. She doesn't want to let go of all of that. And it can be really tough to do when you're dealing with somebody's death. And that I like how she starts dealing with that. And one thing I did not see coming until they reveal it a little bit later when she goes over to his apartment. When we meet Kyle Gallner, when he just showed up, I was like, oh, I haven't seen you since that awful Nightmare on Elm Street remake. I'm glad you're working.
Yes, you have. He was in Scream 5. He was the guy who got killed very quickly by Ghostface.
So much so I forgot about him. Yeah, you're right. He does get killed in like the parking lot. That's right. That's right. He plays like a greaser or something. I think I saw him in that Red State, that horrible Kevin Smith movie that completely.
It's nice to see him getting good. It's nice to see him getting better horror movie roles now.
Well, you know what? Yeah, you know what? He's actually. I've always liked him when I've seen him and stuff, and I'm like, you know what? He's actually good in this. I did not catch that they had a thing going there. I thought like he had like a little crush on her because that nurse does that whole bit like she's engaged, but I'm single, honey. Thing, and I'm like that. I know people like that. That would be funny. And I thought, oh, maybe he was trying to crush on her. But when she shows up later, you realize like, oh no, they were together before her and Trevor, who I only know as the grown-up kid in Independence Day Resurgence. My bad, Jesse T. Usher. But I didn't know him from either. So I'm like, oh, so you upgraded from the cop to like the yuppie that drives a Tesla, and so now and y'all live out in this gorgeous house in the middle of nowhere. And that's the other thing too that it hit me as I was driving back home and I was trying to sort of process this movie. Is that Rose works in a very populated place. She's always around people, but she lives out in the middle of nowhere. And she grew up in a place that looks like it's out in the middle of nowhere. So she's always kind of self-isolating, which can be a very dangerous thing for somebody that's dealing with trauma because that's what they want, but that is not necessarily what you always need.
Right. Yeah. No, but again, like they do a good job of, and I keep using the word relatable, like, I don't want to pretend I have the same type of trauma here as she went through, as we'll discover. But as somebody who just gets, deals with his own less serious mental illness, after a full day of work, you do just want to isolate. You do want to be introverted. Just go home and, put on your pajamas and just sit and watch a movie or something and just not deal with the world. So I totally understood where she was coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. But you get the sense that I didn't pick up on the fact that her and Joel had a thing before. And so she goes by to his apartment and the way he reacts to her, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's why they have that little awkward meet cute thing. Yeah. And it was, I don't know, it was well done. And I like how she drags him into this because you've got to have, and this is where I feel like this movie borrows a lot from Sinister. You got to have a deputy so-and-so.
Yeah.
Which is Robert Cargill. Thank you for giving us that in life. But I mean, really, like, I'm like, well, that's who he is in this movie. He's deputy so-and-so. He's James Ransom. So fine. And it would have been great if they just got Ransom, but maybe he's a little out of it at this point. But he's a little too old to play opposite Sosie Bacon. But
although I will say one of the things that this movie could have done better is when they start researching the line that tracks back. Like, I find it a little unbelievable. Like, no cop picked that up on that to begin with. Like, the first two suicides.
Yeah, like cops, and I'm not being me. I appreciate the work that cops do, but cops by nature, especially detectives, are incredibly skeptical people. So they are taught to look for patterns. And when they see one, they're picking up the phone. They're talking to people because none of them want to become what their predecessors were that let serial killers like Bundy and all these people operate for years because they didn't talk to each other. These guys pick up the phone and they talk to each other constantly now. Like, hey, you got any weird like Chevy vans running around in your neighborhood? Yeah, we do too. And all of a sudden that becomes the rage, right? But and sometimes maybe that's not a good thing, but at least they would communicate that. I'm with you. I'm like, we kind of skimped on that story, but I feel like this movie is like, yeah, you know that thing that all movies do and Sinister did and that Ring does? Well, we're just going to kind of fast forward through that because y'all know what that is. He's going to pick up the computer and there's going to be some blood and you're there, right? Just go. And I'm like, well, I mean, it would have been cool, but I'm also like, this movie's almost 2 hours long. They clearly didn't want to do all of that, and it's also not a TV show, so I don't. It's not made by HBO, so they're not going to drag it out over 6 episodes. So to tell me one, fact, looking at you, House of Dragon, but this is clearly using the shorthand that the audience would know at this, and if you don't know it, it's okay. You don't need it. Yeah, like it would have been good, but it wasn't necessary. But I did notice that too. I was like, well, we jumped from 8 to 5 really fast. I didn't realize we had done that, but okay. I guess we just have to speed along the second act. And I do feel like that's where the movie gets a little perfunctory. But gosh, if it had slowed down at that point, it might have lost something because it does stop for a little while.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I get why they did it. It's just for the rest of the film, considering how true to life they made these counselors and doctors and stuff. I thought to myself, well, I guess they skimped a bit on the cops.
I wanted more of the Rob Morgan character, Robert Talley. He's only got the one scene where he's the prisoner, where Joel discovers that this guy killed somebody. He killed a stranger, and she figures out like, oh, he passed it on to somebody that way. That's how you break it. And so she goes in under, I've got this patient, and I'm asking for a friend. The asking for a friend joke, and then all of a sudden she blurts it out because she can't hide it, and he just loses his shit. And I was like, that was awesome. He's like, you get that white woman away from me? No, I ain't. You are not giving that back to me. I thought that was awesome.
I loved that because the situation is so absurd, but imagine being in his shoes and you found a way to break that curse and then somebody else with it comes to you in jail. Like, I'd act the same way. I'm like, good for you. This guy's smart.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing though. He says something to her though, that I wish they could have just spent some more time with, or whatever, is that the only way to break it is to kill someone else in front of somebody that the curse will transfer to. And you have to make a mess out of it. It has to be really gory. We've seen like police footage now, like the best gas station footage, by the way, ever of this guy getting these head trimmers and just basically decapitating himself in front of a lady, and it just sprays all over her car, and and it backs up, and that's the one who died before the professor who hammered himself in front of the student. How it all connects together. That's how they put it together, and it's just shorthand at this point. I would have loved to have had a little bit more. Like, why does it need such a violent display? If there's something to that, there had to be, but you don't know.
So I was actually curious later on, like, if he was going to be proven wrong and it just had to be something traumatic that didn't necessarily have to happen, because I thought we might have seen her nephew, who was so traumatized by his birthday gift, get it incidentally.
They kind of play with that for a minute. Let's talk about that whole nephew thing. So she's not going to go to the birthday party, but she decides to go to the birthday party because she's been given a week off now. And she's like, I should do something productive with my life. And so she buys him a toy train. But her cat, poor Mustache, has gone missing. And I didn't think about this until that kid gave her the two thumbs up and he started to open the box. I was like, oh, there's going to be a damn cat in there.
I knew the moment we met Mustache, I was like, this cat's going to die.
Well, the way she's sort of indifferent to him, too, is a little weird. But somehow she has been engineered to kill the cat and put it in the box instead of the toy train. And this little boy picks it. And I can only imagine, like, the birthday party from hell. He will never get over this. And I mean, all that goes on, and she falls through a glass table, and it's just crazy after this. And then when she goes back to her sister's house later, and they have this big argument, and she that's when you said it's in one of the trailers. I'm glad I didn't see that, because she hallucinates and thinks her sister comes out and her head just drops down in front of her, which is just a jump. But all we see is the little boy watching his aunt lose her shit in her car. And I'm like, oh, it's going to pass to him. And they go away from that. I'm like, oh, that would have been even better than the boyfriend. I think I thought so too.
I thought it would have been cool if the prisoner was proven wrong. He didn't, get the whole explanation. He got one way he could pass on, and then they discover another way. But
right. And who knows? Maybe they're both. Who knows how it'll wind up if they do sequels to this, and we'll talk about whether they should or not later. But yeah, those are some unnerving scenes. And that's the thing about this movie is it's got plenty of gore in it and stuff like that, but it's also just creepy, unnerving, and again, the music is working, and the way she's freaking out all the time, and just falls through that table and cuts the hell out of herself. And then of course Cal Pen's like, a little worried about you. I'm like, yeah, she's good. I mean, clearly I'm fine. No, you are not fine, girl. Like, there are problems. And what's neat is when she goes back home and the doctor, her therapist, comes to see her. And we already had this happen.
This scene,
we had a fake out earlier with the alarm company. She gets a phone call, and then all of a sudden, it's the alarm company starts going like, "Are you sure you're alone, Rose?" And I'm like, "Oh shit." He just went, when a stranger calls, have you checked the children?
I was about to say, Ghostface jumped over from the Scream universe.
I mean, I was like, surprise, Rose. Is what I needed Roger Jackson for a second. But yeah, and so we've already had that. Well, now the doctor comes over and he's like, because her fiance's tried to have this intervention with her after the cat situation and her fall through the glass. And
what did you think about her? Because this is a good point to ask. What did you think about him? Like, did you think he was almost a little too unsympathetic at this point for how she was clearly having a mental? Yeah, I did too.
He was clearly from a movie like Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, or Margin Call. This yuppie asshole. It's really what and she calls him out on it too. Like, anything that messes up your perfect little life. And I'm like, well, this would be the kind of guy that probably worked really hard for his perfect little life. So maybe he's a little anal retentive about it. Also, you're freaking out. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he was kind of a jerk too. So, but he's also just kind of a nothing character, So, and at one point I thought they're going to reveal that he doesn't even exist. Like
that would have been interesting.
If he was a figment, but I don't guess I don't know if that was ever part of the plan or not. But I could have bought it if he had been like just a projection of someone she had dated maybe after she dated Joel or in college or something, But I don't know. I liked though when this scene though, it may be the best scene in the movie when the doctor comes over with Robin Weigart, when she is doing therapy with her and all this, and the phone rings, like, you need to get that, and she picks it up and it's the actual doctor, and so she realized, I was like, I said it out loud and somebody behind me said it at the same time, like, oh shit. Like, we both muttered it, and I was like, "Oh!" And we kind of looked at each other like, "Yeah, it's about to go bad." And
it was fantastic. Man. And to your point, they had already faked us out once or twice before. So, and yet I still didn't expect it.
And you should, because this movie is telling you, like, we're going to do this to you there's 4 times in this movie, and I'm like, but that's a credit again to the way that the movie's made and the way these actors are drawing me into what they're doing, that I don't see the most obvious thing coming. I know what's going to happen, because this movie is incredibly predictable. Like, you know where it's going to end, but you're still there for the ride because it's just so much fun and compelling. And it's like riding a roller coaster you've ridden a dozen times before. It can still be a lot of fun. Close your eyes at a different spot of the track and you don't know where you are. And this is what happens. But when the way Robin Weigart stands up, walks over that couch, has that smile on, and like chokes her, and just is like that drool coming off, man, I was like, holy shit, this is Alien 3 all of a sudden. What is going on here?
Yep. No, I loved it. And I was trying to, at this point, count how many days she had the curse, because I know they said it was between 4 and 7. And then in my mind, I was trying to rationalize, well, how come it waits 4 days sometimes? How come it waits 7? Is it just, but I don't know. But when Robert Weingart, this was a performance from her, and it was fantastic.
I know that whole, like, it's almost time, Rose. I was like, oh, and when that voice happened, I was like, we got a little cheese on that. Like, we might have needed to undo the modulation a little, because that was a little scream.
I was thinking, I was about to say, I was thinking a little Nightmare on Elm Street when Freddy possesses people.
It was a little Nightmare 5 or 6. Like, now we're playing with power, or something like that. It was definitely getting into cartoon Freddy there. But okay, but you know what though? Again, if a filmmaker is doing that, they're doing this for an audience that knows all of that anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like, man, might as well at least have fun with it. But I do like how her idea for this is like, well, I'm going to pass it on to somebody. So poor old Carl, you're going to get it. So she drives to the hospital, and what we see is she goes in the room and she basically stabs Carl, but the demon possesses him at the same time, and they just starts laughing at her. And then her doctor boss runs in, and Kyle Penn peels his face off like he's fucking V or something, and only for her to wake up in her car again. And I'm like, damn it, stop doing that to me. But then I'm like, but that was really good.
And kudos to Kal Penn at this point, his character, because he tries to get her out of the car and into the hospital because he knows this woman's cracked up at this point.
He sees that freaking Guy Fieri knife, like, no, that's not good.
That's not good. And but she speeds away.
Yeah, well, but I mean, again, I knew I should have known they were going to fake me out, and it should make me mad, but it doesn't because it was so well done. It was so good. And when she rolls up out in the middle of nowhere, I'm like, oh, she's going back to the old house, you know. And I'm like, well, we're going to revisit some old ghosts here, I guess. Let's see what happens. But when they reveal, I guess, and that's what I want to ask you, because I said in the plot summary like this, is this what really happened, or is this just what Rose has reconciled in her mind as to what happened with her mom? Because you can play it either way, and I think the movie works.
I tend to think the latter. I think like a lot of people who go through something like that, they blame themselves.
Yeah.
That they could have stopped it. And I think if they got more into Rose's therapy with Dr. Weingart or whoever, whatever her name is, they would have touched on that. Like, Rose, this didn't happen. You're not at fault. I just think they shied away from that. I do not believe for a second she was responsible for Mom's death. I'm sure she probably walked in on her mom dead and then blamed herself because she was home with her. But I think that's just what the fantasy she made up to, you know, keep blaming herself over the years.
Well, see, I tend to be with you on this too. And I think the doctor even says a line to her about like, you're never going to totally heal from that. Like, it's okay, and you just need to accept that that's going to be part of your experience in life, and it's tough, but you can live and you can move on, but you never completely unfracture that, or however she puts it, or like the wound never completely heals. You know, there's always a scar or something. And I was like, okay, that's really well said. Like, I can buy that. And when I watched it, I was like, well, this movie wants me to believe that, no, she made this choice as a 10-year-old. Like, no, you're an awful person. I'm going to let you overdose. No 10-year-old thinks like that.
No,
unless they're on
it's from your
Dawson's
mom.
Creek or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But in the way she talks about it, when she's screaming at the demon later, you were awful, I couldn't do it. I was like, no, that's what you've told yourself now, because hindsight is 2020. But you didn't know that. You walked in, your mother was dead or was dying, and you didn't know what to do. And at 10, you wouldn't know what to do with that. And so she, I think she has invented this way as a way to blame herself. And as someone who is admittedly my own worst critic and always have been, I can buy this. I'm like, oh,
yeah, me too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I get it. I see how you can go down that spiral.
Yeah, 100%. I have a question for you about this part, though. I knew from the beginning when they mentioned this house, we were going to end up at the house at some point. Do you think the demon purposefully waited for her to isolate herself at the scene of her most traumatic event to go after her?
Maybe. I mean, it didn't seem to have any other real reason to do that other than it just knew that was her story. But like, then why did the professor wait to hammer himself in front of a student? I don't know. Like, it's hard to know like why it chose that, or if it's, I kind of tend to believe on this thing is operating kind of like the one in Fallen is, that it's just sort of happening around, and whatever's convenient at the time, we're just going to go with, that evil doesn't have this big plan that it just sort of does.
They're not all Freddy.
But it's more of what, and there's like a very small piece of this new iteration of Michael Myers that does this. I think it's when he first gets back to Haddonfield in the 2018 Halloween, and he just goes on this killing spree for about 10 minutes down the street. And it's just like that is what the initial version of Michael Myers was. It was just this random force that just killed, And I kind of feel like this is the same thing. This is the story that we're watching. But if we'd been watching the, 10 Tin Shears guy, we would have seen a different story. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fair. The only reason I thought that was because, like, clearly with the doctor, there are a million different times this monster could have gotten her, and it waited. But I was overthinking.
I think it's one of those things too. And this is from just too much readings of Stephen King through the years and stuff. But it waits for you when you're at your weakest, and it's got to wear you down so that it can get you. And like because especially somebody like this who's trained to be able to unravel your mind out of circles, you have to really twist up one of these folks to make this work. And I don't know. I thought it was kind of cool the way she's going about this, but I gotta say though, I feel like this monster that comes forth out of her mother, I said to myself, I was like, why do I feel the influence of a studio?
We need something physical here.
And Paramount, and I've seen Ghost Dimension Paranormal Activity, and I know what they did with that. And I'm like, I don't know that Jack and the Giant Beanstalk was where I thought this was going to go, because if it had turned into her nephew and the sister showing up, and that would have been a different, because they just kind of go out of the movie after that scene at the house, and I'm like, I wonder if that was maybe another part of this, and then they came to this thing at the end, because I'll be honest, this is the point where I'm like, oh, this became a very different movie like 2 minutes ago. I was not expecting this. And when she throws the kerosene lantern on him, I'm like, well, sure, but I don't know. I was not prepared for that. I didn't think
I completely agree. This part, for a movie that had me on the edge of my seat and breathless the entire time, like holding my breath the entire time, when we got to this, I couldn't help but letting out like a little grunt of laughter, like within the theater. Like it just looked. This took me out of it, honestly. And it's
like,
not the CGI giant.
What if It Follows had just become like a giant, bed
genital wart?
Right, right. Like, or different. Or if when the ring when it finally happens and Samara comes out of the TV and shit, like that is creepy as hell. Like that's been set up. It's not like a horse came to life or something random. She doesn't become this 20-foot, gigante.
Well, I feel like there are a million different things they could have done, like you said, the nephew and the sister, or even if it just took the form of the person who passed on the curse to you to begin with. Like that woman with the smile from the beginning was creepy as heck. Just have her there smiling. Yeah.
Right. I could have bought that. That would have been so much more than again, this was just so weird. And I thought, that's not what I expected. When she lights it on fire and she runs out and the house burns down, I was like, oh, well, all right. I mean, that's an ending. Okay. And I thought this was over, and I looked at my watch and I was like, this hasn't been going quite long enough. They don't have this movie, the kind of movie that has 25 minutes worth of credits. So what's going on? And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I think we're going to get another fake out. And then she goes back to Joel's apartment, and I mean, I was almost ready for it. I was like, either she's going to start smiling at him all of a sudden, or he is. And when he dropped that whole, I'll stay with you forever or whatever, I'm like, oh shit. Said it again. And I was like, I knew it. And Kyle Gallner, to his credit, that is a great laugh. And it's so sinister. And I was like, yes, I love it. When she realizes that she's just still at the house, I'm like, oh, this is kind of like Sphere when they think they're outside of the thing, but they're not. It's just still. I'm like, I like this. This is smart. But then they brought back the 10-foot guy again, and I was like, oh, you could have just made that up. That would have been
the 10-foot guy who climbs into her mouth.
Okay, yeah. We got to talk about what this thing does. Okay, it's like this Russian doll of mouths that open all of a sudden. So now we're in like It land, okay?
Yeah, Pennywise.
And it spreads her mouth open like Beetlejuice style and proceeds to climb in. And I'm like, now I've seen a lot of like, demon possession kind of films and manifest in a lot of different ways. I've never seen that happen. I did not think we were going to be getting that today at the movie theater. Because at that point, I'm not gonna lie, Anthony. At that point, I literally just started laughing. I was like,
I did too.
Yeah,
I did too. And you know what? There were a few laughs around the theater too. It did not have the effect Again, I think it was a studio note. I don't think such a carefully crafted movie by this director and cinematographer, I don't think this was their idea.
No,
But
the way it peels its face off too, because it's a callback to what Kal Penn did. I was like, oh, no, you set that up for that. I was like, this feels like a studio. Just like, no, it has to be 10 feet tall and it has to be a spider that Batman fights while he's blind, or something like that. And I'm like, this feels like, well, we want to get it made, so this is what we're going to do. But you knew when Joel showed up out of nowhere too. I'm like, well, how did he even know she was there? Is he low-jacking her phone now? You know, which I was also surprised by this too, because Apple has this thing that you cannot use an Apple product if you are the quote bad guy in a movie. Like, if you notice that, that's always
I've never noticed that. That's
Apple
interesting.
is like really picky about that, and I guess they'll like make exceptions when you're the protagonist of a horror movie and this is sort of visited upon you. But I'm like, oh, like, because when it was so prominent, she's playing with that iPhone 14. I'm like, well, she's clearly not going to be the bad person, whatever this movie is going to be, because they don't allow that. And I was like, oh, well, you faked me out again, once again, movie, thank you. Or maybe Paramount was like, here's a check, we don't care, you know. And then the Apple doesn't care anymore either. I don't know, but I remember that though. I remember reading that, and I thought, okay, well, maybe they still feel like she's a victim here, even though she's kind of now possessed by it. I don't know, but I've somewhere in the middle of the movie, I decided like this has to end with her becoming like part of this, and it just passes on to somebody. Who's she going to give it to? And I was like, it's maybe the sister, maybe the nephew, maybe the useless fiance, but they all disappear out of the movie. Nope, it's the old boyfriend detective, because the poor cops don't have a hard enough life. Let's go ahead, and this guy lives and works in New York. Let's go ahead and give it to him. But I will say that shot when she's like self-immolated, and you just see her eye, I was like, shit, that's good. Like that was
really good. Yep. And I was glad they didn't show her completely going up in flames. Like, we got it through his eyes, because that would have been really hard to watch after spending the whole movie with her and sympathizing with her this entire time.
Yeah. And can you believe, like, at one point they were just going to throw this out on Paramount Plus, but the test screens were so good, they're like, I don't know, let's give it a shot in a theater. And then now look what they put behind it. I mean, look all the money it's made. So
that's insane to me. But that just goes to show studios need to have faith in their filmmakers and their films and promote them.
I mean, at some point, like, I mean, this kind of thing took on a life of its own. And I think because it does have a lot of stuff in it that we know from other places, but it still goes. Well, I mean, this ending is, I did not see that. I saw, her becoming part of the curse, obviously, but the way it unraveled, none of us saw that one coming. I did not expect to get, again, Jack the Giant Beanstalk at the end of this, but okay. That's where the movie went, and we're there. But yeah, I guess before we wrap them up into our usual, final thoughts and popcorn ratings and stuff, Anthony, do you think they've left the door open if they want to go back to this? Do you think they will? I mean, something makes this kind of money. I'm imagining the discussion's already been had around Paramount about doing Smile 2.
Still smiling. I would love if they didn't, because this is such a perfectly executed story for the most part, minus the giant at the end. But again, money talks. $17 million budget, $90 million within under a month. Yeah, they're gonna revisit it some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. I think that's a sad reality of Hollywood nowadays.
I think it's just I think you're right. I think that is the reality. But gosh, I got to say, it's neat to see a little small thing like this take off and become a life of its own. It certainly has been successful, and I think it will hang around. And I won't be surprised if at the end of the Halloween season, people are talking about this movie maybe more than some of the other stuff that's coming down the pipe.
Well, I'll definitely be revisiting this one a lot once it hits home media, because I really enjoyed it. Not to give away my popcorn rating yet. I do have one question though, because there's another little under the radar horror movie that grossed big earlier in September. Did you see Barbarian?
Yeah, same idea. That was one that I felt like they wanted to get out in front of everything, and maybe that was the smartest thing to do, because that movie worked out really well too.
I actually really enjoyed that one too. I'm not gonna lie.
And having seen this, and having just watched Hulu's Hellraiser,
I just watched that today too. Yeah.
I'm like, man, well, Hulu should have thrown that in a theater, but that's another discussion for another day, perhaps. But because the old Hellraisers are all back in the archives, all except that last one, and nobody cares about that anyway. Well, I think it's at the time we're on the podcast where it's time to do final thoughts, recommendations, popcorn ratings. We've already told you to go see it, y'all. So let's get the popcorn ratings out. Anthony, what are yours for Smile?
I am going to give it, what is it, an extra large popcorn, all the trimmings, all the butter. Highest recommendation I can give it. The giant took me out a bit at the end, but it's 5 minutes of the, 95-minute movie. It wasn't that long, 2-hour movie, whatever it was. It's, again, not many films can keep me holding my breath the entire time, but the atmosphere is perfect. Cinematography and direction are great. Acting was fantastic. And it was just a great, unique story that really had something to say about trauma, which I appreciate. I'm glad it had something to say, and it wasn't just a run-of-the-mill, meaningless monster movie. So...
yeah, I mean, again, this movie owes itself to stuff like It Follows, The Ring, Oculus, Lights Out. You know, we've named a million of them here, and we could do another million of them. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily that it has all this shorthand that, yeah, we know what this is, because when it can bring you into the story like it did us at different times where you kind of forget that, oh, yeah, I know exactly what's about to happen. It doesn't matter because it's the way it unfolds. You still don't see it coming. And even though I know the jump is coming, like the cat's going to jump right at the screen on me or whatever, I'm still on edge waiting for it to happen. And that's the mark of something that's really well put together. And I credit everyone involved with this for putting it together and knowing what they had. And I'm with you. I hope they don't do anything else with it. Just leave it as a good little one shot. And I want to see Parker Finn and some of these other folks, they'll go on and do other stuff though. Now I want to see, give them some bigger budget and a little bit more work and see what they can come up with, or maybe not. I don't know. Jason Blum used to argue like you don't necessarily give people more budget because they're successful. You let them keep doing what they're good at. And I'm curious to see where this goes next because I do think this is a filmmaker that's got something to say and made a really interesting film that could just be a derivative B movie that's using trauma as its facade. Or if you really want to dig into it, there's some good like allegorical material here too. And I'm with you. Definitely one I will revisit when it's on Paramount Plus. I'm excited about it. And so I'm going to go large popcorn on it though. I don't go full extra large like you, but I did have a great time with it. So I'll give it a good large popcorn. I
would love to see Parker Finn for Blumhouse make the next iteration of whatever they do with the Nightmare on Elm Street.
That would be very neat. Yeah.
Because I think he could have something interesting to say about like Freddy. Freddy is born from trauma, right? He's traumatized those kids. I think he could do something really interesting with that concept and make him scary again.
I agree. And, I could spend all day, and I did, on a podcast previously in the archives talking about what I wished they had done with that reboot of that movie. And they kind of almost did. And then they stopped halfway in between. I'm like, no, that would have been way more interesting if the kids had made that shit up. And the parents had been, murderers instead of vigilantes. But, hey, that we weren't going to do that. So, because you don't want to feel for the mass killer person, not like that at least. So, but this movie, a lot of fun. Smile was a lot of fun. Anthony, I'm glad we got to talk about it here. A little special bonus episode here for Shocktober because we've already had Blade out with Matt Bledsoe from Film Feast. That was a lot of fun. Brian and I are going to do Halloween Ends, and then Lindsay and Ron and I've got a very special thing to wrap up Shocktober with. I'm going to leave it as a secret right now. We're going to have a little fun to wrap up with. So we'll do it. This was a little bonus episode to have some fun with here, but really appreciate you coming on and doing this with me. Tell folks again how they can follow you and follow Tis the Podcast, all the cool stuff y'all are doing.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say thank you. This was awesome. When you messaged me earlier today to talk about Smile, I was so happy. You made my day today. Like, Sunday nights are always hard right before work, so I was so glad to have something to do tonight. Ward off those Sunday night blues for a while. But yeah, you guys can find me at Tis the Podcast, linktree.com/Tis the Podcast to get all of our social media. Again, it's a year-round Christmas podcast. Me and my co-host discuss a different Christmas movie, television special, etc. every Monday, all throughout the year, except for October when we delve into the realm of Halloween movies, which you guys, if you check us out in the next few weeks, you'll hear Jay here coming on to discuss Scream 2, and you'll hear Ron Hogan come on to discuss Halloween 2018. So should be a good few weeks.
It should be a lot of fun. You can listen to my review of Halloween 2018 in the Film Strip archives, obviously, but Ron wasn't on those shows. But Ron and I did review Scream 2 with our friend Brian back in the day, too. But it's been a while since I revisited that. Remember the last time I watched the Scream movies was before the new one came out when you and Corey and I talked about it. So I'm excited to go back and talk about Scream 2 because I think, as I told you, I have hashtag thoughts about that movie. And, having spent a lot of my adult life working on college campuses, I'd have some specific things that one does with college that we'll get into over on the podcast. But always fun to talk with you. And thanks so much for listening to this episode of Film Strip. Of course, you can follow the show on all the social media platforms at Film Strip Pod. Go ahead and give us a like, give us a follow. If you will, share the show on your social media. It helps other people find the show. And if you're able to do so, give us a 5-star review because it always helps other people find the show. We've been around a long time. We have a big catalog out there. So just go to filmstrippodcast.com, take you to our Anchor distribution site, and you can find all of our episodes there. If you go to our letterbox page, you'll see kind of a big list of everything that we've ever done. And I guarantee you somewhere in the 30 or 340 something episodes, there's something there for you. I promise. So find it out.
And I promise, as somebody who has not listened from the beginning, but you guys have kept me entertained for hours during my commutes and during the workday. So guys, seriously, check them out. Subscribe. There's a total back catalog, which will keep entertained for a few years, honestly.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And once again, thanks for being a part of the show. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll talk to you again soon. For Anthony, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.